and welcome to Hideaway Homestead. I'm Carol. Tonight I would like to fix for you my oil pastry pie crust. This is so easy. None of that cutting in the solid oils into or your solid shortenings in. It is so fast. I've never had it to fail, and it makes the nicest pie crust. Everybody always likes my crust. Usually if I'm eating a store-bought pie, I skip the extra crust around the edges because it's tough or just not what I'm hungry for. But this is an excellent pie crust. So I hope that you will pay attention and that you can make this into something that you use all the time. I'm going to use this crust for two different purposes. The first is going to be our Toll House pie for our snack time tonight. We love this pie, and that's something that is almost a requirement to show up at a Christmas dinner for the family because it is just so good. And so anyway, we will try that, and then we will make a savory pie using some beef stew and a couple more ingredients, and then we will just make this crust to go on to our little pot pies. So two ways to use it, and you can think of a whole bunch more, I'm sure. Let's get started. The first ingredient is 2 cups of all-purpose flour, which I had measured ahead of time. So there you go. That was easy. Then a teaspoon and a half of salt. Right now I'm using pink Himalayan salt because that's what everybody on YouTube is using this year. So I don't want to be different from them. I'm stirring it in just a little bit so that it'll be mixed in. Then it calls for a half a cup of vegetable oil and 5 tablespoons, let me make sure I'm right, yes, of cold water. So here we go. I will measure out, I'm going to measure out the tablespoons into here because if I go nuts, it's going to be a problem. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There. I'm going to add that into my oil container so that they'll both go in at the same time, and then just blend them in. None of that cutting stuff that you have to do with a solid shortening like lard or Crisco kind of a thing. We'll just stir this in. I have made this, if I'm only making one pie, then I do some good math and I divide this in half so that I don't have a lot of extra pastry. But these are ingredients that I almost always have on hand at the house and in our stockpiles, so not a problem at all. I'm just waiting until this forms sort of a ball. And this is enough for 2 crusts. Now, if you're making a double crusted pie, then you would use one for the bottom crust and one for the top crust. But in this case, I'm only doing a bottom crust on my sweet pie and only a top crust on my pot pies. So I can make one recipe useful for 2 things. The excellent secret of this is you roll it out on wax paper. My original recipe said to moisten the surface, and that way your wax paper seems to stay steady a little bit. Somebody I saw the other day taped down the edges. So if you want to do it that way, you can start that way. I'm going to take about half of this dough, put it on my piece of wax paper, put another piece of wax paper on top of it, and get myself started with smashing it out. For the purpose of the video, I put this on our butcher block here on a cookie sheet just so I could turn it easier. The real technique, I think, is to start in the center and work your way out. Tonight, I have a new, to me, pie plate. And so it seems to be quite a deep pie plate. So I'm going to have to flatten this out pretty far to get it up onto that pie plate. But that's sort of a good thing because the recipe for the Toll House pie tends to almost overflow. It's quite a full pie shell. So let's see if I can make that a little bit more round. That's a lovely rectangle, don't you think? Maybe I should have made a square pie. That would work. Okay, so now just peel off that top layer, throw it over there. The maid will clean that up later, I'm sure. We don't have a maid. I'll have to do it. This usually peels off pretty easily. You can just lay it right over your pie plate. You don't have to roll it up on your rolling pin and risk dropping it or losing it. And it just molds itself into the shape of the pie. One of the pies that we love to make, especially in the springtime here in Florida, is a fresh strawberry pie. Maybe you know about Shoney's fresh strawberry pies that they used to have at the Shoney's restaurants. Those are one of our favorites. So now I'm going to just sort of add to this side that was missing some, so that I've got a crust all the way around. And if this were a smaller pie plate, I would be able to crimp the edges in a beautiful fashion. But since this is so deep, this is what I'm going to do. I've got enough so that it's up on the sides. Okay, so there you go. I rolled out the one pie crust. I'm going to save the rest of this for using as the topping for my beef pot pies. So I'm just going to set this aside for now. Maybe cover it so that so it doesn't dry out till I'm ready for it. Okay, so for our Toll House pie, this is so good. What's your favorite pie? Every family seems to have a favorite. Wow, it's hard for me to say which one is my favorite, but this is definitely one of them. I mentioned the strawberry pie earlier. That's another good one. I'm going to crack 2 eggs into this bowl. And I learned in my lesson to always take our farm eggs and do them into separate containers just to make sure one isn't a hidden one that we didn't know was old. So there you go. Now I get to use my new mixer. I think this recipe came from Toll House for Nestle chocolate chips originally, so it's the real thing, I'm sure. We need a 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour. I had all these things measured out ahead of time so we can mix this in. Then we have a 1/2 cup of white sugar. And a 1/2 cup of brown sugar. You always pack the brown sugar. You can see the shape of my measuring cup when you measure brown sugar. So there you go. We've got our sugar and our flour in there. And we'll mix these in with my little whisk here just to get them started. It's never a good thing to turn the mixer on when you've got a whole bunch of flour in there, unless you just want to cover your whole kitchen with flour. Alrighty, we're going to mix this until they're well blended. I think I've almost done that. Found one little big chunk of brown sugar there. I'll have to break him up. Okay, there we go. Now we're going to add a cup of melted butter and cooled, melted and cooled. It looked like so much butter, but I suppose Paula Deen would tell us that's what makes it so good. We'll get every bit of it. Alrighty. We will mix this in together. So, what do you like? Fruit pies? Do you like something like a cheesecake? What about, I like pecan pie. Chess pie is sort of a pecan pie without nuts in it. I like that too. Don't think I'm real fond of mincemeat though. There's something that maybe I'm not so fond of. I remember as a child that one time I thought I was getting pecan pie and it turned out to be mincemeat. That was quite a surprise, but not a pleasant one. Well, you sprinkle several of these on the floor and then you add 1 cup of regular semi-sweet chocolate chips to this. We're going to add 1 cup of chopped walnuts. I suppose if you prefer a different kind of nut, you can do that. And stir those in along with the semi-sweet chocolate chips. And it makes for a wonderful pie filling. Let's get this going. We've already got the oven preheated. So let's pour it into our... I think this is my first time to use this particular pie plate, so I hope it works well. It's almost like a chocolate chip cookie dough, a little bit looser than or runnier than a chocolate chip cookie dough batter, but looks about the same. There you go. Let's put this in a preheated 325 degree oven. And I will show you what it looks like when it's done. Here we go. Last chance. All right, it's been an hour in the oven. Let's see what this looks like. Looks good to me. Nice and brown. We'll set it here and in a few minutes, Kevin and I, once it cools a little bit, we can have a taste of that. Well, now the time has come to taste this. I am already loving the look of this crust. It's not beautiful as far as being crimped so beautifully because of this deep dish pie plate, but the pie itself looks very good. So it is very rich. So if you make this, you aren't going to want to cut a huge piece for yourself. It's so good, but there we go. One for me and a little one for Kevin. Or maybe not. Oh, he's smiling. He knows I'm kidding. But look at this crust. It is so flaky. It is so good. It has just that little bit of salt in it, but it is just so light. It's not like other pie crusts. So you really need to try this pie crust and see what you're going to put it with. Okay, now for the savory part. That sounds so fancy. This is just for our main dish for our lunch today. I'm going to roll out the other pie crust, but first I want to go ahead and warm up the ingredients. So let me get doing that first and then we can make the topping. So I have a can. Well, let's start at the beginning. We received this beef stew mix from some people at church a while back, and we just had this in our food storage. So I thought I would start with that, but other people who have eaten it said that it was lacking a little bit of seasoning or zest, I guess. So I decided that I would add to it some green peas, and because we like green peas in our stew or in our pot pies. And then I'm going to add just a bunch of spices, because you can never have too much onion in a stew, in my opinion. So we'll add some of those peas, and eventually we'll add some garlic and some onion, maybe some seasoned salt, just to make it feel like somebody really worked hard and cooked over this pot pie all day long. You don't tell anybody that I got it out of a bag and a can, and I won't tell your secrets either. So let's go ahead and let those warm up. And the oven is already hot, so I'm going to roll out my pie crust. Okay, so we had pie crust left over, and I figure this is enough to finish off our two little pies. And the more I looked at these little dishes, I think I got these from Aldi a couple years ago, but they've already got like a fluted edge to the top of them, so I can just lay my crust on here. Kevin, who's taping this, but he will be totally surprised when he sees how lovely that fluted crust turns out. So let's get these going. Same deal, got my wax paper down here, and roll them out. I may have to roll this twice. I don't know exactly how far this is going to stretch, so may have to roll out one, cut out the topping, and then re-roll it to fill the other one. I'm going to do them fairly thin, although tell you what, I've been munching on that pie crust. That is good stuff. Kevin and I loved tasting the pie. So crust itself, I tell you, you've got to try this. It is so tasty and so flaky. I'm going to go ahead and measure this with my knife, cut right around the edge of this little pie plate, tart plate. That'll give me one of the crusts. Just because I'm feeling so extravagant. I used to try to reuse all this wax paper every time, but this stuff is really not an expensive commodity. And since I have a brand new roll today, I'm going to be wild and crazy and use another sheet of wax paper. So again, do not tell Kevin. We don't want him to know how I'm splurging. Oh, one thing that I didn't mention earlier that's a nice little tip, if you do just a square of the wax paper, you can sort of use that as a guide for the circumference of your pie. So if you work your crust pastry out to the edges, that's pretty close to a the size of a pie shell. So, ooh, pretty good. There we go. Just a little bit left. That might actually make it onto a cookie sheet. We might eat that separate. Oh, we just like this so much. Okay, so let's get our filling and we can have our lunch on its way. I'm not going to add all of these peas to the stew. These chopped onions are the best thing. Saves having to always get a fresh onion out every time. And can you ever get too much onion in a stew? I don't think so. A little bit of garlic powder, carefully measured. And we'll go without the seasoned salt. We can always add that later. Some salt. Never know what these pre-made things are going to have as far as salt goes. So, alrighty. Let's fill them up. See what happens. I don't know how many this will fill, since this is just sort of a made from stockpile food. But I do suggest that you try to add just a couple of food storage items every week to your groceries, because it is so handy to be able to come up with a nice hearty meal like this for the winter time and just have things out of your food storage. So, which one do you think will be Kevin's and which one will be mine? He doesn't look very hungry today. I'm just looking at him. So, I'll get the big one. See if I can pull this off. It should fit. There you go. Now watch this. Since my plate already had fluting on it, I matched this down. This might have a pretty top. And then I'll do the other one. See how easy that is to get that right off of that wax paper? And just to keep it from boiling over, so to speak, in the oven, I'm going to poke just a fancy little hole there. You like that design? That's my own creation for that design in the top there. All right, going to put these in the oven. I'm going to bake them at about 400, 450, just to get the crust browned, and then we'll have lunch. All right, I just checked on the pies, and it looks like they're about done. So let's pull them out, get an idea of what they look like. I hear some sizzling, so they might have overflowed a little bit, even though I did put my fancy mark on the top. Oh, that's pretty heavy. There you go. We made some hot pies. How about that? There you go. You can see all that bubbling goodness inside there. That's going to be a nice lunch for us. Thanks for joining us today on Hideaway Homestead. I hope you got some good ideas. We'll put the recipe either at the end of the video for the pie crust and for the pie itself, the Toll House pie. And please subscribe to our channel. Please try this out for yourself. Tell your friends about it when they ask you where you got that wonderful pie crust recipe or that wonderful Toll House pie recipe. You can let them know that it came from our channel. Maybe they will subscribe also. Until next time, thanks for joining us on Hideaway Homestead.